Here we go. Okay, so let me just close that. Right, so good evening, everyone. My name's Helen Parr. I work for Devon Wildlife Trust, and I'm working on the Green Minds project in Plymouth. Devon Wildlife Trust is a partner on this exciting Plymouth City Council-led project. It's funded by the European Regional Development Fund's Urban Innovative Actions, and it's a unique opportunity to bring our experienced enthusiasm for wildlife and nature to the green and blue spaces in a large city like Plymouth. This project aims to put nature and wildlife at the heart of decisions made around Plymouth's green spaces. And it's about making space for nature while helping local people reconnect with the natural world and getting all the physical and mental health benefits that we know this can bring. It's a win-win situation, really. So you can find out about other events like this on the greenmindsplymouth.com website. You can also find out lots about all the activities of the Green Minds project. So without further ado, on to tonight's talk. We're going to learn all about urban meadows. And our speaker tonight is Jess Smallcombe, the community ecologist at Devon Biodiversity Records Centre. So over to you, Jess.
Just unmute myself. Hello, thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Really pleased to be here tonight. We're going to have a quick chat about urban meadows. Their kind of importance and how maybe you can create an urban meadow. And we're also very lucky to be joined by Michelle, who has helped to create an urban meadow within Plymouth. So we'll be chatting with her later as well. So Helen's already given us a really good rundown of what Green Minds project is doing. So I've been working on it for the last couple of years. Doing various training events and talks and things, all of which future ones will be on the website. So this evening, we're going to be talking about meadows in an urban situation, and really trying to sort of see if we can inspire anyone to have a bit of a meadow in their garden, and talk about meadows within public spaces as well. So as Helen said, any questions, please pop them in the chat, directed to Helen, please. So in our urban landscapes, there's obviously lots of opportunity for green spaces. We've got our gardens, which are various shapes and sizes, but there's always opportunity there to create a little haven for wildlife. There are parks, and Plymouth has got some fantastic parks, many of which have already got some great meadows in them, and some of which I think there are plans to put more meadows in, because a lot of parks are still, we sometimes get stuck with a bit of a Victorian idea of parks, that they need to be really nice, neatly trimmed green grass and rows of trees. So hopefully through the Green Minds and through talks like this, we can sort of start to challenge that idea. And verges as well. You know, lots of roads have got those strips of green along the edge. Opportunities there for creating something a little bit more, well, a little bit more friendly for biodiversity. But there are other spaces within a city that you could green. So there's our churchyards and cemeteries. There are some really fantastic groups that are working across Devon and within Plymouth in creating lovely havens within these areas. And what a lovely space to do it in. We've also got green roofs, and not just the flat bits, but walls as well can be greened. Possibly not walls covered in a meadow, but they're areas that can be turned green. So there's plenty of opportunity in our cities. And the Green Minds job is doing a really, Green Minds team is doing a really good job working on creating these sort of wild corridors throughout Plymouth. So there's lots of plans and things that are going ahead, tree planting, creating meadows. So you might see over the next phase of the project that there are areas that are being turned into meadows and greener areas. So hopefully this talk will give you a bit of an idea about some of the thought processes behind that, and also how you can create a bit of a meadow in your own garden. You can create a little bit of meadow anywhere, even in a window box. You can use some of those plants that you'd find in a meadow to make it a little bit more friendly for any passing invertebrates. Now, I need to caveat that there is no definitive right way to create a meadow. It's very dependent on a lot of different aspects. So how large the area is, where it is, the type of soil and the use. So we're going to go through just some sort of ideas and some options of how you can maybe sort of create a little slice of lovely meadow. So first of all, what is a meadow? So most of the meadows that we think of are traditional hay meadows. So those are the ones, there's lots of grass, there's lots of really lovely flowering plants in there as well. And they would traditionally have been left to grow throughout the summer, cut for hay at the end of the summer, and then that would be taken away for winter food for livestock, and then perhaps grazed over winter. But it's not a sort of all year round pasture most of the time. There'd be areas where they'd be left and then cut for hay. And the meadows that you get across the country will differ depending on the soils that they're on. So for example, some of the most diverse meadows you get are actually on really, really chalky soil that you'd get further east. We don't have a lot of chalk soil in Devon, just the odd little patch. And that's because meadows really, really like low fertility soil. So that's one of the issues that you come across when you're trying to create a meadow, is that a lot of our soil, our grass, our parks, everything has been what's called improved. So often quite heavily fertilized. Sometimes that can be indirect, sort of because there's been animals on it who sort of are just sort of fertilizing machines as they walk around. Other times it's because there have been sort of chemical fertilizers sprayed onto the ground. And that's really good for some plants like grasses. So grasses love really good, well, some grasses, I should say, like really fertile soils. But to get that lovely wildflower grass mixture, we need to bring the fertility down. So that's one of the challenges that we face when creating a meadow. Why are our meadows so important? So I've got a selection of photos here. I tried to go through some of the pictures that I take as I sort of wander around. Look, I think most of these are from Plymouth as well. The more species of plant that you can get in an area, you're going to have a knock-on effect there on things like the invertebrates, which is so important. So within these areas, if we see a lush green grass area, that may look very, very nice and lush, but actually when it comes to species diversity, it can be really, really poor. So by increasing the different grasses and the different flowering plants, that has lots more opportunities for invertebrates to come and feed on them, to have both at different stages. So we've got larval food plants, adult food plants, all the places where they can lay eggs or hibernate over winter. These are all things that a sort of good healthy meadow will be able to provide. And of course, once you've got a really good invertebrate population, other things will kind of follow. So you'll get birds coming in, you'll get bats coming in, some of the mammals. So for example, our hedgehogs love eating all the little bugs and beetles and things. So as you increase that, other things will follow. Another benefit they have, grasses have usually got quite shallow roots. So they don't sort of hold the soil on quite as well as some of these perennial flowers. So some of these flowering plants can actually have quite deep roots, which can really help to soak up moisture and reduce flooding. Obviously, sometimes, you know, on other soils like the chalky soils that you get further east, you don't get very deep roots. But here, on our sort of quite heavy clay neutral soils, which is what we tend to have, they can do really well. So we have, in fact, over the last, well, less than a century, lost, and this is Plant Life have worked out, it's about 97% of the wildflower meadows in the UK, and that's since about the Second World War, and that's been due to a lot of different factors. So obviously, initially at that time, there was a big drive in creating areas where you could plant, grow more food production. We've had a lot of changes in farming practices over the last few years. We've lost some of these habitats just due to management and various different reasons. So with only 3% of them left, and a lot of those are quite small and quite vulnerable. So it'd be really good if, you know, all of us could create a little bit more meadow. They've also, I think, worked out that there's about 1,400 species of pollinators that really rely on meadow plants for survival. So, for example, Devil's Bit scabious is a plant that used to be quite common amongst meadows, and it's now near threatened. And that is the exclusive food plant of the marsh fritillary butterfly. So you can see that by losing some of these plants, there's a knock-on effect to losing some of the invertebrates, and that's sort of the first stage. So it's really good to keep them and to create them where we can. So why put them in urban situations? Urban meadows don't really need to be any different from ones outside an urban situation in terms of their sort of composition. They might provide slightly different benefits in an urban situation. So obviously they're so important for urban invertebrates, particularly in some of our larger cities. There's a lot of concrete, a lot of roads. Having these corridors of wildflowers or little stepping stones, if they're just in people's gardens, even that, you know, little stepping stones for invertebrates to be able to find some nectar will really help that city population. They can, as I said, you know, they can be really good for the soil and help sort of flooding. And a really important thing that we shouldn't forget is they're just really beautiful, and they can make you feel happier when you go past, or they do me anyway. So just the beauty that they bring as well can be really important in an urban situation where there's lots of people who are going to see them. There are various types of meadow that you can use, or create, I should say. And I'm going to talk about a couple of them now. Long sort of knee-high meadows, and you can also have shorter meadows. Oh, too many. So here we've got a sort of traditional hay meadow. So this is with perennial species. So those are the ones that come back year after year. And once you've established a meadow like this, it's quite simple to maintain. Usually just sort of even down to one cut a year, we'll keep it going. In the centre here, we've got annual sort of cornfield flowers in the cornfield meadow. You don't get very many of these occurring in Devon. It's very much a sort of further east of the country option, but you do see a lot of them because of the fantastic blast of colour that you get from these flowers. And finally, although this one doesn't look very exciting, it's clovers and buttercups mainly, but this is a park that I went to last summer, and walking through it was just a sea of bees. They loved it. So even having a meadow that may not be particularly species rich, but that has got longer than normal vegetation, you know, you can do it with your lawn, you're just not cutting it every week, can still be really beneficial. So when people want to create a meadow, there's usually lots of questions. So where, how, when? Do you use seeds? Do you use plant plugs? How do you manage it? Do you use perennials or annuals? yeah, what do you need to do? What else can you put in there? So many questions. So we're going to go through a few things now. Obviously, the right answer for the space that you want to create a meadow in might differ slightly from some of the answers here. So first of all, where should I put my meadow? Now, obviously, we've got gardens, because urban situations have potentially quite a few problems. So our gardens in urban situations be quite small, but that's okay. You know, you can have a really small meadow. You can have a strip down one side of your lawn, and that just planting that up with meadow plants will still be really beneficial for the invertebrates in your garden. And if you and all your neighbours did it, that would be amazing in your area. If you are looking at a more public space, so these are things, for example, that councils need to think about, or groups like Michelle has also need to think about. So is it an area that has a lot of dog walkers? Because that might be tricky if it's very, very long grass. Is it a litter trap? And by that, there are some areas that just seem to sort of collect litter in a city. Maybe that's just sort of where the wind blows it. But again, if you're going to let the grass grow there, that might be an issue, you know, when you come to mowing it all the time, if there might be lots of litter hiding in it. Is there high foot traffic, a lot of people using that space already? Obviously, if it's a really well-used amenity space, turning it into a meadow, people are going to lose out there. So have to pick a space that's maybe not used that way. And then footpaths and highways, making sure everything's safe and not sort of extending out and over pavements and potentially causing problems or perceived problems. So just doing simple things like cutting around the edge or cutting footpaths through meadows can be really beneficial in public spaces. Also thinking about the maintenance of it. So if you're creating a meadow in your garden, then I think, you know, we can all decide how much time we've got to put into that. And then if it's a council or a group of people who want to work together to create a meadow, looking and seeing how much work it's going to take and how much annual maintenance is required as well. Often it's a lot less than mowing a space, which is really good. That's a very good point. So the maintenance can actually be lower than if you hadn't created a meadow, once you've gone through that initial stage of turning it into one. And there's appearance and public perception as well. So meadows are gorgeous in the summer, and then come autumn, winter, they can look a bit scruffy. So it's about talking to local residents and people living nearby, and sort of helping them to understand why the benefits that this brings, both in summer and in winter, at all stages of year, and the benefits that a meadow can bring. And we discussed briefly soil type, but most of the soils around Plymouth are sort of quite a standard neutral soil, and are fine for quite a generic seed mix. So speaking of seeds, there's two different groups that you can plant. Now I showed pictures of these earlier. So there's the perennials. So perennial plants are generally not as showy. I mean, they're still really beautiful, but they're not the big cornflower ones. They're a really good source of nectar, and they can provide a habitat kind of year round. And it's worth remembering that, you know, all the invertebrates that we have in this area, these are the sort of plants that they're used to as well. It needs yearly management, but once you've started creating it, over time, that management only reduces. So it really can get down to that stage of one cut a year. And it does require patience. So once you first plant a perennial meadow, you'll get different plants coming up over time. So initially you'll have loads of grass, you need to keep that down. And then you get things like oxeye daisies and buttercups. And then you'll get all the sort of the legume plants, so trefoils and clovers and vetches. And over time, that all starts to settle down into a really nice, even distribution. But it can take quite a long time to get to that point. You'll get results quite quickly, but to get to a really nice stable population can take a few years sometimes. Whereas annuals, you can get quite quick results that year. Really high colour, really showy. This is often what you do see on verges. They're also a good nectar source, but they're really high maintenance, because ideally they need sowing each year, and with that sowing, you know, to keep the same sort of level of bloom, that is, you need to kind of strip back the soil a bit each year, so it really can be a lot more maintenance, and they're generally not found around this area. So I personally would go for perennials. There are some things you can do. So for example, if you wanted instant colour, you can sow your perennial plants and a few annuals, which means that you get some lovely flowers that first year, and then as they kind of die back, the perennials come through and you get that sort of longer lasting meadow mix. There are different species that you can look for to include. So when you're sourcing seeds, you can get just wildflower seeds, but you can also get a mixture, which is often sort of 20 to 80% mixture of wildflowers and grasses, because obviously the grasses are important. However, you might want some species that do help to suppress the grasses a bit. So these three species here, got red Bartzia, which is a lovely little plant, very quite short. Eyebright, again, quite a tiny little plant, quite easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. And yellow Rattle, which is taller, stands out, and it's a fantastic plant. It gets its name because as these yellow flowers sort of die back, you get these big sort of pods here, and they dry out, and they've got the seeds inside. And so at the end of the summer, when they're getting dry, they literally produce little rattles. So as you walk through, you can hear them rattling against your legs. But they are hemiparasitic, which means that obviously they're getting some of their energy from sun in the way that all other plants do, but they also can parasitize grasses. And that's because these plants are traditional meadow plants, and they're really used to, they've evolved on low fertility soils. So they're used to trying to find other ways of getting nutrients, but they're also great if you have quite high nutrition soils at helping to suppress the grasses. So we've talked about different seeds, but obviously if you're going to use seeds, you need to prepare your ground. You need to prepare your ground pretty much whatever you're going to do. And that can be anything from stripping off the top layer to sort of scarifying it and just making sure that you've got a really good proportion of bare earth before you start to sow your seeds. And seeds can be, I think the general thing is that you sow about 4 grams per metre squared, which can be really difficult to do by eye. So sometimes it's quite nice to mix them with some sand or something else, so you can really see where you've scattered them, and you've got something inert that's just sort of a carrier, rather than trying to very gently sprinkle 4 grams per metre squared, which, depending on the size of the area you're doing, could probably take quite a long time. So we've discussed, I think, probably enough about seeds, but it's really important when you're sourcing your seeds that you get them from somewhere quite local if you can. You get a good mix that is for your area. So there's various places you can get seeds. So I'd suggest you do your research and find something that's sourced as locally as possible. You can also use plug plants. So these are ones that, as you'd get from a garden centre, just little versions that are already grown. They're not seeds. They need a bit of TLC if you plant them in. They can be used generally to enhance an area. You wouldn't want to start your whole meadow with plug plants. Wildflower turf is a really quick fix. So as you'd imagine, that is, as you'd buy turf for your lawn, but it's come from a wildflower meadow, so it's already got everything in it. It'd be very expensive, so not something you'd want to do a huge area in, but just letting you know it's an option. Green hay is another option. So that is, rather than cutting the hay as you normally would, sort of right at the end of summer when all those seeds have fallen already, you can cut green hay earlier, so kind of in June, before the seeds have really had time to set, and you can bundle that all up, and you'd have to quite quickly take it over to your receptor site, and then you spread it out there and all the seeds drop on your receptor site. But you do have to do it quite quickly, because if you imagine if you mow the lawn, those cuttings do sort of start to heat up and try and compost quite quickly. And the last option, I just called it passive, but this is something that I think we could all try this year, which is basically you just leave your lawn, just leave it, see what comes up. You know, embrace No Mow May and extend it to June and July and see what you've got in August. You might be really surprised. You might, you know, you can sit there, even if you just get buttercups and clover, the invertebrates are going to thank you for it. And you can see what you've got, and then maybe you can start making some plans for next year. So that would be my advice for this year, is just don't mow, or at least a bit of it. Let's see. Oh yes, and again, patience. So it can take up to 15 years to really properly restore a meadow. Thinking that there are really high diversity meadows can be 150 years old. So you know, you do need patience if you want to get them that good. So when you're caring for your new meadow, first of all, you're going to get lots of plants that want to grow because they've still got loads of nutrients in the soil. So that's grass is going to be the dominant one. So when you start, depends on the size of your meadow and how you've gone around creating it, but you might need to do a few cuts. Obviously not during that key time when the flowers are going to be coming out in summer, but you might want to cut sort of through the spring after its first year and the winter, and then take away all those cuttings, because you don't want to be putting any more sort of fertile grass cuttings onto the ground. Take them away, reduce that fertility. You're going to have docks, nettles, thistles, things like that, that again will come up. It's good to remove those. You don't need to remove all of them, because obviously they also have their benefits for various, particularly butterfly species, but you don't want to let them really get a hold. So you might need to sort of keep an eye on them for the first couple of years or so. But then hopefully your meadow will start to settle in, and you'll be able to really reduce the management that it's needed. So you can then cut it maybe even only once a year, and deciding when you want to cut it as well. So you can cut it at the end of summer when all the seeds have settled and they've gone back into the ground ready for next year, and that'll kind of tidy it up for winter. Your other option is to leave it over winter and cut it sort of in early spring, which means that although it might look a bit scruffy, you've got some fantastic areas for invertebrates over the winter. So depending on what you think you can do in your garden or area, then there's two options. So obviously always take your cuttings away, reduce those nutrient levels, and keep any scrub at bay as well. And then you've got this lovely meadow, and what else can you do to make it, you know, really great? So you could add things like a pond. You know, you're trying to bring all these invertebrates in. Ponds will help you to then bring in amphibians and reptiles as well. They'll give everything a place where they can drink, all these birds. They're really, really good enhancement for your meadow. You can add fruit trees, hedges, bat boxes, bird boxes, places for your lovely local friendly hedgehog to hang out in winter. Log piles and bug hotels are great for invertebrates over winter as well. So there's lots of different things you can do to enhance your meadow. So that's a really quick run through of all the different things that you can create. And I want to just say again that you can do this as a tiny little strip, you know, not even a metre wide down the side of your garden, or you can do it on a bigger scale. And I'm going to ask Michelle to join me now, as someone who has done it on a slightly bigger scale. So Michelle, are you there? Hi.
I'm still here, yeah.
Fantastic.
Intently.
So Michelle is from, well, you're part of an organisation called Community Life and Wildlife, CLAW, yep. And you have planted a meadow along Delamere Road. So that's for those who aren't familiar where that is in Plymouth, that's not far from the Forder Valley Junction, is it?
No, it's not. Unfortunately, it's not far enough.
But that's your location.
It is, yeah. It's also opposite Alston Farm. Is what you were saying earlier. If people can involve schools, it's a big winner, because you're also working with those children as well and showing them not just the wonders of wildlife, but how important and how much we need everything connected. And the children do love it. They really enjoyed it.
So you sent me a few photos of
yes.
the area. Can you tell us why this area was a good area to create a meadow?
Years ago, this house, the set of houses down the bottom, it was built sort of around about the 1950s, and there are quite a lot of areas like this in Plymouth where they incorporate that. It's deemed as a welcoming green, if you like, and all that. Over the years, we used to play ball on it as children, which is a bit dangerous because it's roads all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
And all the council have done have just systematically mowed it. And as I've been watching the decline, as you mentioned earlier, the statistics of the decline of nature, and the more I became involved, and after turning my own gardens into, well, I tried to cram in as many habitats, natural habitats, squeeze everything in as much as I possibly could. I realized that it was really more important with the research that I've done. Wildlife needs corridors. It's just the way that we're traveling along a motorway and all of a sudden the motorway ends, but right off into the distance, we can see it start again. That's no use to us. And it's exactly the same for wildlife. And unfortunately, we've come along with our roads, our fences, our walls, our houses, and we've fractured all the habitat. Schools, even farms with our agricultural practices. And because we've fractured everything, it's having a big impact. Combine that with pesticides, poisons. I don't use any pesticides or poisons either in my gardens or on the Delamere Road patch. It's nice that I'm working with the infrastructure team of Plymouth City Council. So we've agreed no pesticides or poisons will be used on that. And I cut it with a scythe.
Oh, fantastic. I'm just going to go, we've got a picture of after as well.
Okay.
Was this the first, how many, was this the first year, second year?
I can't see the picture you've actually, bear with me.
No.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that was the first year.
Wow, so a real difference in 1 year.
Yeah. There's the poppies that actually came up. That was in the first hit was the poppies that it came up, and they were really well received by everybody. In fact, the children said, were they made of paper? Which is, isn't that cute? It's almost like they hadn't seen a real poppy before, and I think sadly in this day and age, it's sadly true. Many of them hadn't.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's gonna. You've sent me some great photos of how you sort of, well, the team went about creating it. So we've got a picture here of starting to strip some of the turf. Now you approached the city council to sort of help with, you know, this, didn't you?
I did. The prequel to that is I was after I did my gardens, it wasn't enough for me, so I became a volunteer for Active Neighbourhoods, which introduced me to the wonderful Plymouth City Council infrastructure team, which I didn't know anything about. They also gave me the skills, but they also introduced me to some wonderful people, which was Gemma Sharman, and also the wonderful Hayley Partridge. And they actually gave me the confidence in the end to pour out my dreams to Gemma. She was amazing because she actually organized a meeting and said, tell me all about it. So I poured out all my dreams, and then she smiled and went, let's do it, let's go for it. And I could have cried. I don't even remember walking home that day. I think I flew home that day. But that's the hedge you see at the bottom of that picture is actually the front of my house. So I'm right on top of it. And if you look beyond the bottom there, you see the road and you'll see the trees and the top of the school.
Okay, so we've got the school very local. We've got
That's it.
One more here. Was that the sort of the final area that was prepped?
We've actually, yes, that's the area that was prepped. We've actually shrunk and we've extended the right hand side and shrunk that middle section, so there's even more wildflowers, because what we seeded on the right hand side, what I noticed was it kind of took over with what you were saying earlier, and what I've been saying to a lot of people is let your grass grow, see what's there first. And it's almost like Mother Nature went, oh, we're going to go this way, is it right? I'm going to put a few more up here. So I asked, could we extend the right hand side and make the middle circle just a little bit smaller from the right hand side? And yeah, they did. So that circle's not quite as big, and there's a couple of benches in there now as well, and fruit trees.
Fantastic. So I mean, we can see the amount of effort it takes to sort of prepare the ground initially. Oh, there you are with your seeds. So that's 4 grams per meter squared, ready to go. And is this how you distributed the seeds?
Yes, borrowed again. That was on borrow from the. I've lost a bit of weight since then. Hooray! Borrowed the cedar from the infrastructure team. They allowed me to borrow it for the day. In the background, there's my mentor, Tess Wilmot, who's full. I don't even know if she's here tonight, but if she is, hi Tess. Wonderful lady who gives me lots and lots of information, especially she's planting the fruit trees there. But that was a little bit of a challenge bobbling around with that, because the ground's very uneven. But as you said, with mixing sand with the seed, that's exactly what we did there, so we could see. And then it all had to be raked in, and it was just myself, Tess, and I managed to bully a friend into joining. He's part of the group as well, just to try and rake it in. So we more or less did it all in a day. That's
brilliant. All in one day, although the preparation took a bit longer, I expect. So you've got some
diggers first, yeah.
Oh yeah, and you've got some signage as well, so that helps to kind of tell people what's going on. And has that been helpful in sort of bringing all the surrounding community on board?
That little sign there was just a makeshift notice. There's actually a better, proper one in now, which the wording is the same. Some of the plants that is in there.
Yeah, it feels like it.
Oh, you're frozen.
Oh,
sorry.
Sorry, that looks like the sign is there for when it's just in production.
It was.
So we've got another picture here of all the lovely
poppies.
And on one of the benches.
Yeah. One of the benches. I do believe that's Richard, a fellow volunteer. There's a smaller picture actually. I can't quite. If I click on that, no. Go with me.
Well,
yes, that's Richard. Yeah, me being silly with my leg in the air. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your story of creating a meadow. I'm sure people probably have got some questions
okay.
for you as well. So if you do have any questions for Michelle or for me, please pop them in the chat. And Helen, I think you've probably got some questions. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much, Jess. That was fantastic. Run through all things meadowy. And Michelle, thanks for joining us. It's really brilliant to hear an actual case study of what you did and how you managed to get some help with it. It's fantastic. It looks amazing. It must be great. It'd be great to see what kind of insects are buzzing around and using that area now. So yeah. So I have got, there's a few quick questions. You have covered some of it a little bit. Someone was asking, works in school, and they were asking Jess about using the wildflower maps. And did you have any advice on that? But actually a bit later on, not when you mentioned it, somebody else messaged and said they often have a plastic backing on them. Yes, and they say it's biodegradable, but it degrades down to microplastics. So I just wondered, what's your view on those?
I think if you can avoid that, if possible. I moved into a house a couple of years ago, and when I started digging up some of the normal turf, it was just full of plastic on the back, and it's yeah, not very nice at all. So I completely know what you're talking about. Mine is,
it's probably a more expensive way of doing it as well, I imagine.
It is. I think that was more just so you know that it's a possibility.
It's an option.
It's probably not the first choice.
Okay, and then this is not exactly meadows, but it's a good question. It's someone actually who's based in southern Scotland, but they're just asking about green roofs. And that actually, before you answer that, I have seen some information on the Royal Horticultural Society website about green roofs, if people are interested. And there's also a website called livingroofs.org, where you can find out quite a lot more. I don't know if you've got any more information on that, Jess.
Sorry, what was the question? Just generally?
About any advice on how to sort of create a green roof. But I know, go on.
Well, obviously, because they're on top of a building, it's something that you'd need to talk to, professionals who do it. So there are people who do it because, having the sort of the organic layer on top is going to be really heavy, and particularly when it rains, it can soak some of that up. So you really need to make sure that you are, if you're going to do it or you're planning to do it on a building, then you're working with people who do it all the time and understand the stresses and strains. I think they're probably quite difficult to retrofit onto a building, so it might be something that you start off with. But you could have one on a shed in your garden.
Yeah. And the same person, Angela, is wondering, is it possible to replace all the grass in her garden with wildflower meadow plants? And there's also fruit trees ahead and some herb beds. I mean, I would say yes, wouldn't you, Jess?
Yeah, you can. Remember that the grasses are important too. So the flowers themselves are fantastic, but grasses are flowering plants, and particularly for butterflies. So the sort of brown family of butterflies, our meadow browns and butterflies like that, they all need grasses. So everything from cocksfoot grass, Yorkshire fog, things that you're quite likely to find in your lawn anyway, through to fescues. That's what they lay their eggs on and what their caterpillars eat. So don't completely rule out your grasses, but just maybe reduce them, increase the species diversity along with your flowers.
It's important, isn't it, to remove grass cuttings, because you want to try and reduce the fertility. So that's probably something you could do it gradually over time. And another bit of that question was, if you were going to replace your grass with other things, would you need to dig it all up? And I suppose that's kind of the approach that we saw by Michelle's house, but that's not always necessary, is it, to do that serious an intervention necessarily?
No. So what you do need though really is some bare earth. So you don't need to necessarily scrape everything off the top, but you need to get in there with obviously a machine makes it a lot easier, but really digging up the turf and creating bare patches, raking away some, so cutting it down as short as you can, and then really getting into the earth to create those bare patches so that your seeds can take. Someone's just asked actually if you can just sprinkle seeds over grass. It doesn't work so well. You need to have some bare earth for them to take. They really need to get into the soil a little bit, not really deep, but they need a little covering. unless you, just because otherwise it's really difficult to compete with grasses. So you need to do something that can just start to remove some of the grasses first, just to give those new seeds a chance.
In our garden, we've done like a really small area of wildflowers, and then each summer after they've flowered, we kind of cut it and then just spread it onto the bit next door to that bit. And so that's kind of way of doing it quite economically and expanding it each time. So Gail is asking, are there any sort of recommended species lists for gardens, small front gardens that you could recommend?
I think that obviously the seed, where you source your seed from, if you look for something that's a sort of meadow mix on a neutral soil, you get kind of a really general one. I've got a packet here that I tried sowing in my garden. I'm afraid I didn't prepare the ground properly enough, and it was total failure on a very small area. But you can get ones that this doesn't actually have the species on it, but there are kind of standard species which will be a few grasses, usually, if you get a mixed bag of seeds, and then things like the knapweed, and it'll have some of the legumes, so maybe some vetches, bird's foot trefoil, things like that. You can buy individual seeds from different places, so you can just buy, for example, yellow rattle seeds, which is one of those hemiparasitic ones and can be really good in helping to sort of, well, by parasitizing the grasses, helping to suppress them. And that as well, it depends on when you sow them. So things like yellow rattle need a really cold spell. Ideally, they need a winter. So you'd want to sow them in a sort of autumn, so they can sort of have the cold snap they need to germinate for spring. There are lots of other seeds that you can plant at this time of year in spring, and then they'll come up in the summer. If you do put in yellow rattle, often that will just stay dormant in the soil until next year. So depending on what species you have, they might have different suggestions on when you sow them. But starting off with kind of a generic seed mix is great.
Yeah, and well, crack on. There's got quite a lot of questions trying to get through it. What we will do is send out a follow-up email where we'll put a link to this recording, and if we've got any other resources, we'll attach those and send them on to people, because someone else is asking how could they find out what kind of local plants they have in their area. So
there is various information about meadows on the Wildlife Trust website and lots of other good websites.
And then someone else is saying they'd like to put some, use an area of their garden, but it's quite shady and it's got lots of lesser celandine all over it. And should they just give up now? Or what can they do there, do you think?
It's quite hard to grow something when it's that shady. But again, just leaving an area and seeing what comes up can be a good start. It might be that you're not going to have so maybe traditional hay meadow, but you can still get the long grass and other species in that would be useful for invertebrates.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then someone else is looking at doing some rewilding across some housing estates, and it's linked with an art project. And they're saying, can they mix leaving areas and then doing sort of to see what's there and do some bits of planting? And I think the answer to that would be yes. Absolutely. You can definitely do it gradually. You don't have to do the whole area and then find out something's not quite right. It's best to start small, I think, isn't it, Jess?
Yeah, so the area that we saw in Michelle's photos, that was sort of all done in one go, really, wasn't it, Michelle? Yeah. But you can just do a strip and then leave the rest and see. And so like you were saying, Helen, if you're cutting that and then just scooting over some of the cuttings to the next area so the seeds can drop there and sort of progressing. But it's really nice to see what species you get coming up anyway.
And I don't know if we're going to answer this. It's like Gardener's question time. This person's got a large area of heavy clay covered in buttercups. What other species could sort of go in with that? That's a hard one, isn't it? You'd have to. I mean, I would say we use I don't know if this is product placement, but at the Wildlife Trust, there's a company called Gate, which we use a lot because they have very good genetically sourced seed, and their website, we'll add it to our follow-up. It's wildseed.co.uk, and in all their meadow mixes, they do have ones for different soils, and you'll be able to see the mixes that they would put together. And you can buy fairly smallish amounts of seed from them. I think it's a minimum of 100 grams. So that would cover a sort of 5 by 5 metre area. So I think a bit of research is what's needed there. But sort of going on from the green roofs question is one about living walls, so vertical meadows. I think that's possible, I would say. Would you?
You're probably not going to get a meadow in the same way that you would on the ground, just because it's harder to do the drainage on a vertical wall. So there tend to be sort of specialist plants for vertical walls. But I mean, you can have your own sort of little bit of meadow. Like I said, if you can put like window boxes up and things, you can plant, you know, species like bird's foot trefoil you can put in a pot, which are really good for invertebrates, and they're a sort of classic meadow plant. But in terms of actual green walls, I think have to look into the species that specialise in that rather than grasses and meadow plants.
Yeah. There's a question for Michelle here. What was this? Can you just give us an idea of the seed mix that you used on your project, and would you do anything differently if you were doing it again?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the infrastructure team at the time went for a company, Meadow, and as somebody else was saying about clay soil, it's quite difficult soil in Delamere Road because there's a layer of shillet underneath, and it was generally farmland years ago, and I think it was actually picked for that kind of soil, that sort of clay shillet type mix. But what's come up, as you saw, the poppies come up, and poppies kind of like that kind of soil. So, and you still bring in so many insects. There's new species of insects showing up all the time. So it's, as you were saying, it's different soils. My garden's very much the same, and it's part shade as well. So you can still get a big biodiversity going on with, it may be a little bit more of a challenge, but it's so worth doing.
Yeah. And also, that kind of longer grass is fantastic for small mammals, isn't it, as well as the insects, and that's going to be good for that sort of predators that prey on some of those things as well. So
we've actually got pipistrelle bats flying over my gardens.
Oh, great.
And it's brought the hedgehogs in as well, so you can imagine.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, no, it has a good, and also what you said about reducing pesticides in your own garden, and that, I think that's one of the most easiest things that people can do to really help wildlife, isn't it? I'll just crack on with some more questions. If you can't, if you haven't got a scythe, what's the best kind of option for mowing, or would you use a strimmer, or what would you do there, Jess?
So someone's sent one directly to me actually asking about what's the best way to cut. So it's going to depend on the size of your meadow. I think whether you're going to need something, if it's field sized and you're actually making hay, then you're going to need something a bit more industrial, or lots of friends with scythes. If it's in your garden, you can just use a normal lawnmower with a sort of collecting bag at the back. If it's a small space, actually the best thing to do is to cut it, leave the cuttings just for a couple of days, because that really just helps all those last bits of seeds, if it's disturbed a bit, to drop down into the soil before you collect the cuttings away. So if it's not too much effort to do that, then that's best. But otherwise, leave it until all those seeds have gone back into the soil, and then you can just cut it with a normal, well, you might need to strim it first if it's that long, but you can just use sort of normal tools.
And someone's asking, is it better for the insects to mow at the end of autumn or earlier in the spring, and if so, kind of what sort of time? And I guess that's going to depend on climate, but also I would say, just quickly, my view would be, if you're mowing, the higher you can mow, so leave the grass a bit longer, the less sort of insects that you're likely to damage. I mean, it is inevitably, whenever you mow grass, there is going to be an impact on the insects. So that's another reason for not doing it too often. Jess, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, no, just to agree. So if you're doing a cut at the end of the summer, again, doing it quite high means that anything that's getting ready to spend the winter will generally be right down at the base of the plants. So that will kind of leave those as much as possible. And similarly, if you're doing it in spring, don't do it when it's too cold. So it's finding that balance of waiting for it to warm up a little bit, but not waiting so long that everything is already starting to grow again. So finding that sort of timing, which is going to vary depending on, you know, what the year's like. So
okay, well, so we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just sort of try and get through a couple more questions. The question about the spreading the seed in the sand, I can quickly explain that. Basically, you mix them into sand so that you can see where they, correct me if I'm wrong, Jess, you can see where you've sown, and so it just helps you get an even coverage across. The sand doesn't have a particular purpose. You can just see where you've spread it. So on a small area you probably wouldn't need that, but on a larger area it helps just to make sure you haven't put all seed in the same place.
This means you can scoop up a handful and scatter it, rather than trying to sort of sprinkle like this over a metre squared.
Yeah. Someone's recommending Plant Life as they're a charity, and they sell wildflowers. They would have good mixes for particular soils.
And they've got lots of information as well. And there's in Devon, we've got more Meadows. We've got some really great organisations that you can find out more about.
Someone asking, okay to put wildflowers under apple trees, or should they be separate from the trees? Well, I'd say it's fine. That's fine. Put it under. I mean, it'd be a bit more shaded. So
yeah, but you can do it as long as you're not damaging the roots of the apple tree when you're doing it. Just you can go right up to them.
Yeah.
I think.
Go on. Sorry, Michelle.
I've actually done that with bluebells.
Nice.
Bluebells quite like the shade. So with my gardens and with the Delamere Road, I've actually put bluebells underneath and then around the fruit trees.
We can't hear you very well, Michelle.
Is it not coming out?
Oh, no, that's fine now. You might have had your hand on the microphone.
I might have done, yeah. Bluebells actually in and around underneath the fruit trees. I've got the fruit trees in my garden, and there's a few in Delamere Road. And if it is quite shaded, bluebells actually quite like the shade.
Yes. They're a plant that can tolerate the shade. That's right. We've just got one final question. This is someone who's managing a local nature reserve, which is supposed to have grazing on it. But I'm trying to think if we know of any examples of urban meadows that allow grazing, or if grazing works in that situation.
So there's you often don't get livestock right in the middle of cities, but I mean, I'm in Exeter, and I know there's some of the sort of areas around the edge of Exeter that have been grazed. I know in Plymouth there's places like Pool Farm, which is kind of on the edge of the city, and they have very low density livestock, and they've got some lovely meadows which are grazed throughout the year. So I think that's the key thing is, if you're having a meadow and you've got livestock, to keep the densities really low, because obviously otherwise all you're doing is also just introducing more nutrients into the soil through those livestock. So it's lovely not to have any, but it's also, it can be a really good way of keeping the grass levels down, and also disturbing some of the grass so that some of the seeds have got more chance as well, particularly over winter. So there's a balance that can be found there.
Thanks, Jess. And I've actually, amazingly, I think we've managed to get through nearly pretty much all questions. If anyone, before they leave, if you have got any feedback or comments about this session, do pop them in the chat. It's really useful for us to get feedback of whether we pitched it right. Is there anything we could have done differently, and we will use that information for further talks, or just if you enjoyed it, and if you're actually going to put it into practice, something that you've learned today, that's really useful for us to know. And while people are doing that or leaving, I just want to really thank Jess again, and thank you, Michelle, and thanks everyone for staying till the end of the talk, and I hope, yeah, just get out there and have a go, and it doesn't, you know, you can do it fairly inexpensively, and just sort of see what happens. Basically, you can't do anything bad, and you may do some real good with it. So yeah, thank you very much.
Send us your photos this summer. We want to see your lovely meadows, and
yeah, definitely,
take a stroll down Delamere Road as well.
Yeah.
Yay.
And keep an eye out. We'll do some follow-up email, but do join us. We've got some other talk every couple of weeks, so we've got other talks going on, and in the summer hopefully some more in-person events in and around Plymouth if you're local to that area. So thanks very much everyone, and good night.